Alright, well here's all our shutter and diaphragm blades. Let's pull the shutter blades to one side. The diaphragm blades, we'll deal with these. The diaphragm blades have rivets on them which form pivot points, and you have to be careful not to snag anything on them when you're cleaning them, otherwise you could damage those pivots. You could bend the blade or you could rip the pivot out. So here I'm just using a toothpick to hold the blade down while I'm wiping it. And these blades, there's a bit of brown on there, which is like the rusty looking marks that were on the blade actuating ring, and which wiped off the blade actuating ring fairly easily. So it may have been something else. So I'm just cleaning these blades, I'm inspecting them to see what state they're in. They're not like new, but they're more than serviceable. And they're not very oily either. There's virtually nothing coming off here. There's just a few wee marks on them, a bit of dust. Nothing serious. It's not uncommon to find these things quite oily, in which case they're prone to sticking together, particularly in cold weather. And then there's a danger things will get ruined if you change the aperture setting and the blades don't want to move. Okay, well those diaphragm blades are all clean now, and I think we'll put those back on in the case and then deal with the shutter blades. If you look at this side, you'll see that there's a couple of little marks there where the screw heads bit. They need to be down. We need to have the plate this side up. So it's dead flat on that side and you can't see any impression from the screw heads. Put the diaphragm blades in place. And the first three can simply be laid on top of each other. Getting the pivots in place. I find it easier to rotate the plate so that I'm working in one direction all the time. Okay, the next blade, I've got to pull this blade back slightly so we can get to the pivot point. And for this blade, we've got to pull that right back and its mate to get the blade seated here. Now I've got to lift this blade over the end of that without disturbing anything, and swing all the blades in towards the centre so that they're all evenly spaced. Now I've got to look at this and see which way it is up. Okay, so this big cutout here, that big round one at the top, that's where the shaft is going to pass through from the shutter plate. It lines up with this round hole in the case, so we know the case goes on that way. We've got our plate here that swings the blades in and out. I'm just looking to see where that sits. I know it's going to sit here or the other way up. I think it sits like that. That looks good. The cutout on it is a cutout on the rim. That lines up with that large hole there. The start of the cutout is here. extends round this way. You can see the angle of those ramps. So that's the way up it goes. Now this thing here should just fit straight on. Of course I've got to lift this off here because we can't have this piece poking up. It would hit things. Now I've got to lower my case over the top. I'll flip this over, put the jig back underneath. I've got two holes that the screws went into. Now, there's a little mark on the case right next to that one. Now I'm not sure whether that's been put there to mark where the screw went, or whether it's just a coincidence. But I can see where the screws went because I can see the marks that the head of the screw left on the plate. And these two holes are directly opposite each other. Snug the screws up, but don't go mad. The aluminium casting is very thin. That means that it's easy to strip the holes out. Now here, this is where this is going to couple to the ring on the back of the case, and you can see that those diaphragm blades move in smoothly. So that's all good. We've done well. That's the case sorted out. Well, these blades will need to be dealt with in much the same fashion as the diaphragm blades, except we don't have any rivets to worry about. However, shutter blades need to be able to move very quickly, unlike diaphragm blades. So it's important that you don't bend them up in the cleaning process. Here I'm mostly looking to wipe off any oil or grease that's on the surface. I'm also looking and checking for any surface roughness that might affect the way the blades move. If they're rough from corrosion or from something stuck on the blades, then you will usually feel that on the tip of your cotton bud as you're cleaning them. Now there's certainly some mark on this blade right here. So I'm inspecting that to see what I think it is. I think it's a corrosion stain. It's like perhaps moisture sat on there. It's a very small patch. It hasn't gone down through the bluing on the blade. And I don't think it's worth dealing to that with metal polish to change its appearance. I don't think there's anything to be gained in that. It's important that the shutter blades be free from any dust or rubbish sitting loose on them too, because here the shutter blades will be trapped between the rear glass and the centre glass elements, so there's no way we can blow out any dust if anything's sat in that spot. Alright, they look good. Now for the assembly. Right, so here's our shutter. I'm making sure that this is set in the cocked position. And I'm going to disconnect the arm here by pressing back the little arm and sliding this piece of the blade actuating ring to its stop in that direction. That sets the blade actuating ring in the blade's open position, which means it'll be easy for me to lay the blades in place. Now looking at my marks on the case, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So I can tell which order I'm putting these blades in. And we know the blades are going in the open position. Now blade 3, you have to get the tip of the blade down into that slot in the brass piece. It's the only awkward blade to place, the other 4 are no problem at all. Okay, so our 5 blades are all in position. Here's the post that comes up through the case, comes up through the round hole here at the back of the case, so we know which way round this goes on. I lower my case on. Hopefully it fits on there without a fight. I'm just checking with the tips of my tweezers to see that the screw holes are lined up. And they are. Now we can fit the 4 screws that hold the case together. One of these was a long screw, and I marked the case with the letter L over there for the long screw. And the 3 shorter screws went in these positions. I'll get them started. Just running those screws down lightly. There's always a danger that a blade has been displaced while you were getting the case over the top, and if that's the case, you don't want to trap the blade in the wrong position and potentially damage it. The long screw, of course, goes right through the mechanism plate because a spring bears up against the end of it. We can turn that over, and I can check that the blades move backwards and forwards smoothly, and they do. So that's all good. I can go back now and tighten my 4 screws. Okay, so far so good. Yeah, we've got a detent spring that goes in this position and acts against the post here on the blade actuating ring, and that detent spring's job is to make sure that the blades remain completely closed unless they're being driven open by the mechanism. Now the screw that goes in here on that detent spring is a shoulder screw. Sometimes it's a bit awkward to get this position correctly and get this spring moving freely around the screw, around the shoulder of the screw, and not trapped under the shoulder of the screw. Just poking that spring around to make sure it's seated correctly. I can tighten that screw down. And I'll lift the tail of the spring up and over behind that post on the blade actuating ring. So now that's all correctly placed, and the shutter's cocked at the moment. So if I release the shutter, it goes open. I'm holding the shutter release at the moment so that it's acting in B. When I release my finger, it should close again. And it does. So that's all working nicely. And we can put the flash sink post back in place and get ready to be putting the retard gear train in place. Alright, so here's our flash contact and so forth. The post here has to fit down through a hole here. Now unfortunately on the mechanism plate, it's only a half hole on the mechanism plate because the edge is machined away. It means it's awkward to get this thing to seat correctly all the way past the edge of the mechanism plate and through the hole in the back of the case. See if it'll go for us without a fight. Sometimes they do. Today might be my lucky day. Oh, I think it's going to go. Oh, I've got the tab on the wrong side of the post at the moment. I'm going to lift that over. Yes, I was able to lift it over without losing the position. Okay, so we've got it. This gets held down by a little standoff, and on top of the standoff there's this little lever which will move the flash contact. That sits on there like that. So now all we have to do is get this brass screw through the lever, through the standoff, through the contact and into the mechanism plate. And since these are all tiny pieces, they'll want to go 1,000 different ways as soon as you touch them. So let's see if we can achieve this. Now it's already turning to custard. This is an early shutter. They changed the shape of the flash contact later, which did away with that spring that was on the back of this, and I'm not sure it made it any easier to fit though. Probably made it worse. Sure whether you can see much. You can probably see about as much as me. No. The contact has moved, so the screw's not passing through it. And if it's not passing through the contact, it's no danger it's going to go into the mechanism plate. Here we go. Alright. So when the shutter fires, this piece moves with the blade actuating ring, which swings this arm over. It acts on this piece here, which makes that flash contact point there. So we'll see if it actually does it. Sometimes they don't, and the contact's got to be bent to make it right. Yeah, I'm not convinced that was making very well. I'll bend that flash contact in slightly. Cock that shutter again, see if we can have another go. What I'm watching for is any sign of deflection on this piece against that pin, which would tell me the flash contact was making. It looks like it did reach at that time, so I'm quite happy with the state of that. Okay, so what do we want next? I think the retard gear train. Alright, so I want to cock the shutter. And the retard gear train we have previously cleaned, and so that should all go in there nicely without any arguments. At least I hope it will. That's it, the seat's there. plain screw goes down in that position. Don't do that screw up tight, just do it up very lightly, because otherwise you'll never get this screw hole lined up for this one. And this one is the one that's shaped like a post. That should be good. Now if we release the shutter, what do we get? B. It's jammed. This thing didn't move at all. Let's try that again. Speed train's not working correctly. This should have moved freely back to the rest position over here. I'm looking to see what the problem is. Oh, I can see the problem. This end is bent down, it's scraping on here. Let me just bend that up slightly. It's still catching there, that's certainly bent. Not sure how that arm came to get bent. Yes, most definitely. All right. Okay, well, I better investigate what's going on there. Slacken these two screws off. Make sure this thing's absolutely seated correctly. Certainly appears to be. This does not move correctly. Alright, I'll take that out and give it a little bit of adjustment. So, you'll see that it does work nice and smoothly. And what was the secret? Well, I'll show you. Very annoying. Something is obviously just a little bit bent, enough to make it awkward. So we'll take out these two screws. Lift out the speed train. On the bottom of the speed train there's a tiny lever here. Now that lever needs to sit in here, in this space between that pin on the blade actuating ring and the centre. It sort of hangs just over the top, and every time I went to tighten the speed train down, that lever was sitting on top of that post instead of being inside it. And that's what was causing the problem. Of course you can't see it once it's in position. It's pretty much impossible to see what's happening there. But that indeed was the thing that was causing the problem. So let's see if I can get these fixing screws loosely in place. Make sure that lever is sitting on the right side of the post. And we should be in business. So I can see it there, it's sitting up on top of the post. So why should it be doing that? Well, I suspect that something is just slightly bent. Perhaps a stop that it normally comes back and rests against is bent so that it allows it to swing across further than it should do. I don't know. Let's do our screws up now and test the shutter. Yeah, it's working completely normally. So that was it. It was that tiny lever on the bottom of the speed train it should be sitting in over here, and it was not. It was sitting on top of that post, and as a result it meant it didn't move, and because it didn't move, the pallets wouldn't move inside here, so nothing was shifting. The post itself couldn't move, the blade actuating ring couldn't move, because it was being held down by this tiny lever which was sitting on top of it instead of being beside it. So that was incredibly frustrating. Get tired of things like that sometimes, but at least it's done now, so that's good. I'm going to put a little bit of molybdenum paste on the cam surface here where it cocks and latches behind the lever, and on here where this piece contacts the blade at the retard gear train. That should just about be all that's needed there. That's all looking good. So this is, because this is a Vero shutter rather than the Pronto shutter, there's no self-timer to worry about, so we don't have to deal with that. See if we can get our detent back in place. Now I can see that the spring has helpfully fallen off this, which is fun because it means I've got to figure out which way it goes. Now the detent is going to be up, that way I think. So the spring goes on I'm not sure now. I could cheat and look at the Pronto shutter that I've got here beside me, but that wouldn't be right, would it? Let's go that way. I have in mind that's not quite right. I'm going to have a look now. Cheat. Hang on. No point having resources if you don't use them. Oh, okay. Good. Good. Always good to know. I was trying to fit it the wrong way. That'd be why it wasn't going to go. Okay. Let's see if we can get this sitting in position. We get that screw in there. I think I can get that, yeah, that should go. This is awkward because the screw is got quite a large head on it, but it's not a particularly long screw. It means it won't balance on top of that post while I'm trying to get the thread started. That'll do. That'll do. Okay, and our spring goes in there and comes around and bears against the inside of the case there. That's our detent for our shutter speed settings. It's quite a strong detent, that one. It's a bit unexpected. So, what are we looking at here? Do I do anything else inside there? That is pretty much done. If we put the shutter speed settings cam plate on there, that shutter should function. I've got the pin on the back here, have I? Let's put the case on and then put the pin through here.